Well, it's time for the first full midweek fixture list in a 23-24 championship season. It's match day 7, and today we're going to run through our score predictions for all 12 games. And of course, as always, I'll encourage you to do the same in the comments, and we'll see who wins when we come back on Thursday to look ahead to the weekend action. Very quickly before that, though, we've got to have a look back at match day 6, which has just finished as I'm recording this. And the story of the weekend for me, as you can see, is a very good Friday, a very good Saturday, and a slightly disappointing Sunday. Albeit for my overall season predictions, that will be handy too. So I managed to pick up 12 points this weekend, 2 perfect scores, and again, the Championship's favourite scoreline delivered. A 1-1 between Hull and Coventry started me off well. Almost called Southampton Leicester right as well, but that fourth goal, little bit of a kick in the backside for me. But I did pick up another perfect score on Saturday with a 3-1 win for Sunderland at QPR. And look at the sea of green on the rest of Saturday. A very good match day for me. 12 points overall, but 2 of you managed to beat me and 1 of you managed to match me. A very different story from the last match day where 6 points was the joint top score. So let's have a quick look at the standouts from the comments section. We start with Mitchell Porthouse, who managed to get 12 points, the same as me with 2 perfect scores, albeit for different games. And then the 2 runaway leaders in second place, Stuart Hunter with 16 points, 4 perfect scores, which was an incredible effort. And then Tony Blakemore doing what he did a couple of times at the end of last season, just having a blinding match day with 17 points overall. And that also included 4 perfect scores. So well done to you and to most of you down in the comments who got much improved scores from the last match day. But let's move on to game week 7, which will take place over Tuesday and Wednesday night. There's some interesting games, and generally last season the midweek match days produced a lower average goal output per game. So I've taken that into account in my predictions, and we start with the first game of the match day, which is Bristol City v Plymouth on Tuesday night. Bristol City played out that 0-0 draw with West Brom, which, to be fair, was a pretty cagey game. No shots on target for West Brom, which is a positive for the Bristol City defence. However, not a huge amount of threat themselves, but it probably wasn't the most entertaining for the neutral. For Plymouth, an expected defeat to leaders Preston, albeit a narrow one against their former manager Ryan Lowe. And again, they did have a counter-attacking threat. They kept a lot of the ball. They were a little bit susceptible to the break, and Preston had enough good chances to win. But Plymouth have still got a threat, which will stand them in good stead this season. I do worry about this game a little bit for them, because Bristol City will probably adopt a similar plan. Rather than trying to press them high and pen them in, they'll probably let Plymouth have the ball, try and counter-attack them. And although they're not quite as an attacking threat, or a threat in general as Preston, I still think they'll be alright in this game. I can see it being very tight and cagey. I would bank on a pretty low scoring one here. But for me, this is going to be a narrow home win for Bristol City. I'm going to go for nothing inspiring or exciting. Again, probably not game of the week for the neutrals. I'm going to go for the host to win it by 1-0 and continue what will then be a 3-game unbeaten run for them. Let's move on to the second one, which is Cardiff City versus Coventry City. Both sides may be a little bit disappointed with their start overall, but very different emotions at the weekend. Cardiff in a South Wales derby with a big 2-0 win at home to Swansea. What a moment for Ollie Tanner, and what a time for your first professional goal, a minute after coming on off the bench for them. And Aaron Ramsey, well, I think Rangers fans will be watching with jealousy, seeing him score a penalty in a big game there. But a very decent performance, and managed to end that curse in the big game, which does show a mentality that we didn't know if Cardiff would have. And of course, seeing those key players step up, I guess the big question is, can they do it again 3 days later and in a game that's not against the big rivals? Of course, we'll find out the answer as we go along. Coventry, of course, pose a very different threat to what Cardiff have seen from both Swansea and Sheffield Wednesday, who are probably 2 of the poorest sides in the league at the minute. Coventry have a real counter-attacking threat, and they do have a bit from set pieces too, but they'll be really disappointed with their second half against Hull, and particularly the way they threw it away late on. They can have no complaints about not winning that game, and it does make it a very long run of draws now, 4 in a row for Coventry. It just can't quite get over the line, and it's becoming a bit of a frustrating start. But in this one, I've just got a feeling there's going to be a little bit of a come down for Cardiff. I wouldn't be shocked if it's a draw again, and maybe I should have thrown in another Championship's favourite scoreline here. But I don't want to sit on the fence too often, and I just feel that Coventry may nick this one on the break. So I'm going to go for a 2-1 win. Of course, Cardiff not helped by playing at 7:45 either. less break than Coventry had, who played on Friday night. So I'm going to go for Cardiff to lose by 2-1. I would not be shocked if this is a 1-1 draw. Let's move on to the leaders against another side in the playoffs, and both had very differing weekends. It is Preston North End versus Birmingham City. Birmingham had, 87 pretty solid minutes against Watford, and it was almost the game that we predicted it would be. Then what happened late on? Lee Buchanan sent off in the 88th minute, followed by 2 stoppage time goals from Watford in a game where they'd had very little threat, to be honest, prior to that. It had been the sort of away performance we were used to seeing from Birmingham under John Eustace, where it was very compact, very tight. Again, they let Watford have loads of the ball, but they didn't really create anything. And Birmingham probably had the best chance of the game. But the late red card and going down to 10, they did not cope well with it. And it's a learning curve for them. A very poor 5 minutes took away from what was a pretty solid 88. And in the end, Watford win it 2-0. And they didn't really have to do a great deal to get there. So a rare defensive lapse from Birmingham, and it was caused by a red card. They go against the Preston side now, though, who are top of the league, so they'll need to refocus. The only side in the division that remain unbeaten, and it is 6 games in with 16 points after a 2-1 win against Plymouth. Ryan Lowe getting over that emotional side of being against Plymouth again, where of course he left in fairly acrimonious circumstances. But they went 2-0 up early. They really started the game well. And as we've seen with a lot of teams that have been successful recently in the Championship, gave up possession, let Plymouth come forward and hit a relatively susceptible defence on the counter. The second half, they weren't great. They gave away chances, but none of them as clear-cut as what they had in the first half. And in the end, it was a just about deserved win. As Preston, well, they're on a great run, aren't they? 5 wins in a row in the Championship after that draw at Bristol City on the opener. And I will say this for them. Bar maybe Sunderland, they've not played any sides expected to be in that top half this year. Birmingham, maybe a slightly better side based on what we've seen this season. That was their first defeat of the season too. But I think Preston are going to just edge this one. I can see Birmingham going with the same approach to try and get a 0-0, play out a solid defensive display on the road. But Preston at the minute are flying, and I've just got a feeling they'll nick one. So I'm going to go for the same score as I did in the first game. Perhaps a less than enthralling, but an efficient win. 1-0 to Preston North End. Let's move on to QPR versus Swansea. Already looking a pretty big game at the bottom. 20th v 22nd, and Swansea were so poor and lacklustre in the derby. It was really weird to watch. Gave away a poor penalty. You can question whether it was on the line or just past it, but it was a clumsy challenge. And it just didn't look like they had much of a threat through the game. It was a very bizarre watch, especially when you consider Swansea's recent record in a derby. And maybe Michael Duff in the early stages struggling a little bit more than we expected. For QPR, the game against Sunderland sort of played how I expected, but only after the red card for Jack Colback. The first 20 minutes looked promising. An early goal for QPR. Sunderland not offering too much of a threat. But then that challenge, which was a poor one from Colback on Joby Bellingham, probably a deserved red card. And then from that point on, it was just Sunderland attacking at will. And they've got pace, they've got quality, they've got a set-piece threat. I mean, they're a pretty complete attacking unit, Sunderland. And they're not the side you want to be playing 70 minutes against with 10 men. They've got energy to burn, and they showed it. It prevailed in the end, and they deserved to win it 3-1. So probably what I expected to happen in the game, but only after the red. For QPR, though, that was the sort of opposition that was always going to be a nightmare for them. Swansea probably play into their hands a bit more. For QPR, it's a chance to get on the front foot to counter-attack themselves a little bit. And while, of course, they are without Colback, which is a miss, they've still got a bit of attacking flair, and you've got a bit of bite through the middle. And we've seen with Swansea this season, particularly in their last 4 games where they've conceded 9 goals, they are going to give up chances against every level of opposition. If QPR take them, for me, they win the game. I'm going to go for a bounce in Loftus Road with a 2-1 win at home to Swansea. Let's move on to a side, well, in crisis after a positive start in the first 4 games. It is Southampton versus Ipswich Town. Ipswich up in a third with 5 wins and just 1 defeat from their opening 6 games. They got what was a pretty efficient 1-0 away win at Sheffield Wednesday. There is no doubting that Xisco set up to try and nullify them, but to not give up a shot on target, to dominate the game. And if we're being honest, I talked about Ipswich the opposite way against QPR, where it was a miracle they didn't concede. It's a miracle Ipswich only scored 1 in that game. I think by the Opta stats, they have 4 clear-cut chances. They had a bundle on target. They played really well. and they kept winning the ball back high up the pitch. It's a wonderful side they've got, and while they might not win every game this year, they're going to be enjoyable to watch, which as a neutral for me is fabulous. And talking about a team that play into their hands, we come to Southampton, where I don't think we could have called the Leicester game any better, albeit I went for 3-1 instead of 4. The game played out exactly as we said, and this is the problem for Southampton and Russell Martin. We said it ever since he was appointed. They're predictable, and they don't have a plan B. And defensively, with the players they've got, they should be keeping clean sheets galore at this level. But they're not playing to their style, they're not playing to their strengths, and it's costing them really badly. We've mentioned it before, when they've not been playing sides who are in the bottom 7 or 8 in terms of relegation odds, they've let in 13 goals in 3 games, and they've lost 2 of those. They've still got goal scorers, they've still got a threat, but Ipswich are a side who are high energy, who are going to press them high up the pitch, and if they try and play out from the back, as they will under Russell Martin, they're going to get caught. I can picture it now. Southampton to have 60% of the ball, Ipswich to get a couple of gifts, and Southampton aren't going to win the game. Whether they draw it or not, I don't know. I've edged onto an Ipswich win because I feel the momentum, the boos around the stadium, the confidence is going out of the squad. And it is still a fairly young Southampton team. So by that, I've gone for Ipswich to nick it 2-1. I wouldn't be shocked if we got a 2-2 draw, but I'm going to go for Ipswich to nick it. And Russell Martin has got to adapt with this young squad, but he's not going to. We've seen it at other clubs. Let's move on to the final game on Tuesday night, and it's now being billed as El Sacico, which I think is a little early, let's be honest. But it is 2 sides that are yet to pick up a win this season. For Sheffield Wednesday, perhaps that's not a surprise for so many, but they host Middlesbrough, who with Michael Carrick were flying last season, got into the playoffs. They can't buy a win this year. Again, they created bundles of chances against Blackburn, as they did against QPR, but they haven't got the goals in the team they had last year. To have 21 shots on goal, 6 on target, and still not really look like scoring too often is some effort. Latilath has just not got settled in so far. The attacking players they've got not quite the same quality as Archer, as Akpom were last year, and they're having to adapt a bit. We're seeing changes to the team with players dropping out that you'd maybe be surprised by, and I just think it's going to take a little bit of time. This game, though, is one they have to come and get a win, because Sheffield Wednesday have had a dismal start to the season. Not scored in the last couple of games, and while they have tightened up a little bit under Cisco from their first few games of the season, if we're being honest, in that Ipswich game, it could have been 2, 3 or 4 and it wouldn't have flattered them. They created really good chances, and Sheffield Wednesday at home to not have a shot on target, it is starting to look a bit ominous. And I know a lot of us had them down there, and I know we got a bit of stick for it, but I don't see the positivity at the minute. I don't see where the win's coming from. The good news is all of those games, despite chances being given up in some of them, have been narrow scorelines, so it doesn't take too much to turn it around. But for me, this is Middlesbrough's first win of the season. I feel it's a game they have to win, and I feel it's a game they might win. For Sheffield Wednesday, I don't see where the goal comes from. I'm going to go for Borough to nick it. Again, probably not in a great game, with a classic 1-0 away win, which is probably just what they need. So after predicting the joint second worst defence in the Championship for a clean sheet, let's move on to Wednesday night. We go to the side that Middlesbrough lost to, which was Blackburn Rovers, who host Sunderland. Flying under Tony Mowbray again, starting to find that counter-attacking threat with new players in the team again. And albeit it took a Jack Colback red card, and they didn't start brilliantly in that game, in the end they overran QPR and created chances galore. They're such a fun side to watch away from home when they're running at defences at speed. They're the sort of side that would terrify the life out of you as a defence. And ultimately, you can see them being exciting. While they'll probably be a little patchy this year and maybe a little inconsistent, they've got that quality to excite. And as a fan, that's probably all you want to see. For Blackburn, a crucial win against Middlesbrough. Not a vintage performance, but again, created chances. Probably should have scored another as well. And they kept the ball pretty well, which has not always been the case for them this season. So really impressed with both sides at the weekend. I do think this is going to be the thriller of the week, because I know Sunderland kept a couple of clean sheets before, but it was susceptible early against QPR, and Blackburn's defence has been a bit hit and miss. So I'm kind of hoping that we'll see an end-to-end attacking game. At worst, Blackburn try and nullify them and they cancel each other out. But let's go for the spectacular. Let's hope for the best case scenario as a neutral. I'm going to go for thriller of the week. Sunderland to nick it away at Blackburn. Tony Mowbray at his former club. That extra little bit of motivation. And I'm going to go by 3-2 And you know what happens when I predict a thriller. There's a 1-0 incoming. Sorry about that. Another game that's turning into the big one at the bottom half of the table. It is Huddersfield Town versus Stoke City. Now, Huddersfield are coming into this one after back-to-back wins. That brilliant one away at West Brom sort of rounded off nicely by a 2-0 win at home to Rotherham. Thorber Thomas and Josh Koroma both getting into aggressive attacking positions, something Neil Warnock had talked about before. But will Neil Warnock be there come Wednesday night? Because apparently there's going to be a press conference on Monday. It was a very short and sweet and abrupt post-match press conference where he answered 3 questions on the match and the performance and nothing else, which is not very Neil Warnock-like in his return to Huddersfield. And it's a shame because we all mentioned it in pre-season. He's basically the only reason we've predicted them to stay up. He is a very good manager and he's getting the best out of a young and inexperienced and a pretty average group of players in some places. This is the sort of game where you would probably back them to nick a win under Warnock. Stoke have been struggling a little bit recently and those early positive signs have drifted away. Now we've got to bear in mind their last 2 away games have been at Millwall and Norwich, Ipswich prior to that, and their only home defeat is against table toppers Preston. They've not had a great run of games and they've looked very good in some of the others. However, this is the sort of game where they've got to get a result. But their away form suggests that isn't going to happen. Only scored 5 goals, albeit defensively they're not bad. I think we know it's going to be a low scoring one. If Neil Warnock stays, I would back Huddersfield to nick this 1-0. But my suggestion would be that everything's pointing towards him not. And maybe as a result, I'm going to go for the Championship's favourite scoreline. I've got to game 8 without predicting one. So let's go for 1 goal apiece. On to 2 sides that will have had a slightly different amount of rest going into this game. Hull City versus Leeds United. Of course, Hull played on Friday night and got a late equaliser against Coventry, whereas Leeds went to Millwall and were fabulous on Sunday. A bit of early pressure in that 3-0 victory. Matchday may be fortunate to get a free kick early doors, made a very good save later in the first half as well. But generally, Leeds dealt with the set pieces, the long throws, the free kicks, the corners very well. And on the counter-attack, I can only say one thing. They look like a Daniel Farke side. We said it in the pre-season predictions. I got a bit of stick for predicting them to win the league. I said if they sign a striker like Joel Pirro, they will have a party. And now they've got a ruthless edge. They've got a poacher up there. Rutter's starting to look good as well. Nonto off strike flying. Somerville show flashes of brilliance. This is a Leeds team now with the window shut and with good players in that are starting to look like a Daniel Farke team. They're going to be up there this season. They're starting to look better defensively too, which is important. 2 clean sheets on the bounce. And in this game, while Hull are a decent side and I like what Liam Rossini is doing, I'm afraid I can only see one outcome. I feel like Leeds will hit them on the counter. We'll just have a little too much for that defence. And Leeds probably will be a side that finished this season with maybe a better away record than a home one. I don't think it's going to be as much of a runaway win as the Millwall game because Hull are better defensively. I just think they'll nick this one. Leeds United to win by 2-1, but both sides unbeaten in 5 in all competitions and doing really well. So a good start to the season for both, and Leeds now picking up and flying up to where they should be. Let's move on to the side that Leeds United beat on Sunday. Millwall host Rotherham United. Rotherham disappointing in a 2-0 defeat at Huddersfield, were soundly and deservedly beaten. And we said it last weekend and I'll say it again. Rotherham away from home this season are going to find it really difficult. They just don't look like they've got any inspiration on the road. And they don't yet look like they've got a game plan to cope with it either. We talked in the summer about losing some of the mobility out of the side, particularly in the wing-back areas, which I know Fred Onyedinma's come in and has looked good in the home games as well. But it's not quite the same. They're not quite as strong defensively and they're not quite as mobile overall. For Millwall, it's going to be a very different type of test because, of course, they play a far more direct game, and while Leeds dealt pretty well with that threat, they're going to be able to bombard Rotherham, and eventually at home, will that pressure tell? It's not been the best start to the season for them. They won on the opening day, but of course only once since, and with a 3-0 defeat, the confidence will have maybe sapped a little bit. I think it's going to bounce back here. I don't see where a Rotherham away win comes at the moment. They're fortunate for now that Middlesbrough have started poorly, or they would be in that bottom 3. And I have to go for Millwall to win it comfortably. When they're on form, when they're flying at the Den, they always win by 2-0. And while it was only 1 against Stoke, I feel Rotherham's defence will give them the second. So Rotherham, they're letting 2 again. I've got to go for it. 2-0 to Millwall. On to the penultimate game, which is Watford versus West Brom. Watford probably couldn't believe their luck on Saturday because it was petering out to a boring 0-0 against Birmingham, which would have been a frustrating performance again. But in the end, a 2-0 win, a comfortable one, and their first win since the opening day of the season, pushes them back into the top half. And it was a gift. Lee Buchanan's red card allowed them to go and score 2 goals in stoppage time. And fair play to Watford, they took advantage, but I know they got 3 at Coventry. I'm a little worried overall and consistently about their attacking threat. Prior to that, it had been 3 blanks in a row, and it didn't look to be much when it was 11v11 against Birmingham. For West Brom, well, no attacking threat in that game, a 0-0 draw against Bristol City, but Carlos Corberán might well be happy just to have the clean sheet. It, of course, is a worry that they went the whole game without a shot on target, and that would suggest this could be a poor game. Part of me wanted to go for a 0-0 again, but it's quite rare sides have a back-to-back 0-0 draw. So I've tried to be optimistic here and go for the Championship's favourite scoreline of 1-1. Of course, West Brom is the game I predicted to be a pretty good one last weekend, and it ended up being 0-0. So it might well be the same again, but both sides looking uninspiring in front of goal, both much improved defensively from their previous performance. I'm going to sit on the fence. Championship's favourite scoreline, 1 apiece at Vicarage Road. As the final game, and maybe the most exciting game on paper of the match day, are the sides that I predicted to finish 2nd and 3rd this season. It is Norwich City versus Leicester City. Now, it is no doubt that since the injury to Josh Sargent, Norwich have not been as much of an attacking threat. However, the big news against Stoke City was they got the job done. They won 1-0 with Jack Stacey, and they were decent value for it too. Again, gave up a bit of the possession, hit on the counter where they've got a threat. But it is now about finding another consistent goal scorer. And of course, Adam Idar not delivering too consistently at the moment. But we saw the new striker off the bench. We've got Ashley Barnes still contributing. And they were able to take some of them off later in the game. So I do feel that Norwich are still a threat. Leicester, they couldn't believe the luck at Southampton again because Southampton just played into their hands. Now, I do want to give one little bit of credit to Leicester because the question I asked prior to the match on Friday was, would Maresca adapt, let Southampton have the ball, and then press them at the right moments to counter them? They did exactly that. So good management on that front. They're not going to get a game as easy as that for the rest of the season, I wouldn't have thought, unless Southampton do the same at the King Power in a few months' time. But for me, it was a really good display. They were far more ruthless than they had been in previous games, albeit still wasted a couple of chances. We saw Mavididi, for example, before his goal, probably should have squared one for another goal. But a comprehensive win. It'll be a lot trickier at Norwich, who have been very good defensively at home. And on this occasion, I am going to go for Norwich City to nick it by 2-1, because Leicester, prior to that game, hadn't been convincing. Every game had been settled by a goal. I think they'll go back to having a bit more of the ball in this one, and Norwich will possibly hit them on the counter. So 2-1 Norwich to finish. Let's have a quick recap of what I've predicted for Matchday 7 then. The first full midweek edition of the season, and my thriller of the day is definitely Blackburn v Sunderland on Wednesday night. I've gone for a 3-2 away win in that one. Quite a few 1-0 wins either way. A couple of Championship's favourite scorelines near the end. And most importantly, the pressure will build on Russell Martin as Ipswich win 2-1 there, in my opinion. Let me know what you think of my predictions though. Those are just mine ones. Get yours down in the comments and let me know what you think the scores will be this midweek. As always, if you beat or match my score, you will get a shout out in the recap at the start of Thursday's episode. It'll be out as early as it can be, as I'll be recording it after work. And that'll be for the weekend and match day 8. If you did enjoy this episode, please do put a thumbs up on it and subscribe down below for regular content from the podcast. We'll have our Premier League preview for Luton v Wolves in a couple of days, and then the Championship will be back on Thursday. I hope you're looking forward to all of that. A massive thank you for your support as always. Good luck with your predictions in the comments, and I hope your side gets on well. I'll see you back here on Thursday for Match Day 8 this weekend.